Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is a pleasure to be hosting this conversation today on how to catch a big fish. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicola Corzine, and I am the founding executive director at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. We are a nonprofit committed to helping our entrepreneurs in the world find their paths forward, rise and thrive despite the challenges that you may find. And the ways that we do that is we put forward responsive programming like the one that you're attending today around issue areas that you may be facing. We ask you what is keeping you up at night, and we try to build programs that can help you get unstuck from those challenges and get back to building amazing businesses that help our communities flourish and help our world do amazing things. Now, as you may have seen in the chat, the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, has recently launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs. It's called Mentor Makers. And just like our entrepreneurs, we don't believe in doing anything small here. So we have big ambitions of putting forward 1 million free mentor hours for more than 50,000 businesses over the next year. And to do that means that we want to be there in support of you, whether you need access to great mentorship or whether or not you're sitting there going, I would like to help support businesses that have been challenged during COVID and beyond. If you find yourself thinking that you could benefit or would like to contribute, then we would love to encourage you at the end of today or during times that may be available to please go ahead and sign up so that we can get you that help, or we can unlock your intellectual capital in support of our great businesses. We know mentorship matters to all of our entrepreneurs and that their success is dependent on it. So thank you for helping us unlock that potential for all of them. Now, as a reminder, we are going to be opening up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please go ahead and submit your questions at the bottom of the screen that you'll see there, and we will try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. Before we get started with a couple of polls, I do want to take a moment to say all of our resources, all of our support, all of our mentorship programs are offered pro bono. We take and charge for nothing. But what we do recognize and appreciate is those that make all of that possible. So to our sponsors and our donors, our deepest thanks and appreciation. We're truly humbled by all that you do for us. So NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, NZTE, and Microsoft for Startups. Thank you. Now, during these difficult times, in fact, for the last year now, we've actually been trending and tracking how our entrepreneurs are faring during these times. So I'm going to launch our first of 2 polls right at this stage to ask you to just go ahead and take a moment, if you will, to let us know how you're doing. We know it has been a long, long winter, and unfortunately, it's not quite yet over. And while our entrepreneurs are always optimistic and hopeful, we want you to be able to make sure that you're finding your own wellness in these times. So if I can invite everyone that's joining us today to just share top of mind, stream of consciousness, no deep thoughts here, just how are you doing? That will be a really good, important indicator for us to be able to measure. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and let you know we have a number of optimistic entrepreneurs. Thank you all for taking this poll. We've got 62% of our audience today feeling really healthy and vibrant in these times. Understandably, though, still a number of you that are struggling with surviving and a little anxious in this as well. All completely understood. So I've got one more poll that I want to launch right now, and then we're going to get into our fun topic today on how to catch a big fish. The second poll is back to that initiation that I mentioned earlier. We build programs for you based on what is keeping you up at night. So I'm going to ask you right now, what are you struggling with? What would you like us to produce more programming in support of? How can we help you achieve all of those big, bold ambitions that are ahead of you as entrepreneurs in this world? Do you need more help with finance? Is it sales, marketing, scaling, pivoting team, or just hanging in there and surviving right now? All answers are greatly appreciated and welcomed. And our program team will take this, interpret this, and make sure that we are putting forward programs that matter to you over the course of the next 8 to 10 weeks. So thank you for taking the time to help us shape the programs that you need for your future. And I will go ahead and end that and share the results. Obviously, we are in a sales-focused environment today, so not too surprising to see that close to half of our audience right now are saying we'd love to get more help on sales. Equally seeing some good marketing and finance support coming in here too. Thank you guys so much. Now, without any further ado, let me go ahead and introduce today's amazing panel of experts that we're going to learn from today. Please join me in giving an incredibly warm welcome to our special guests. We have Alan Newstead, Senior Vice President, Head of Strategic Sourcing at Bank of the West. We have Joan Foley, Head of Enterprise Sales and Sales Solutions at LinkedIn. And we have Whitney Sales joining us, General Partner at Acceleprise. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Looking forward to hosting a great conversation and making sure that we answer as many of our entrepreneurs' questions that they have right now. But let me kick things off with sort of a general prompt, if we can, around how things may have obviously changed when it comes to sales in a pandemic. And I'm going to prompt this by saying, at the same time of answering across our panel, if you'll also take just maybe 30 seconds or 60 seconds to share a little bit more about each of your amazing backgrounds as we do this, that would be great. But what has changed in the world when it comes to buying and selling during the pandemic? Joan, maybe I can invite you to start, then Alan, and we'll round it out with Whitney. Off to you to start with.
Great, thank you. So I'm Joan Foley, and I run an enterprise acquisition sales organization at LinkedIn. I've spent the majority of my career in sales for many, many years, both large organizations, starting with IBM, Oracle, and then going to early stage pre-IPO companies for almost 15 years. So I can definitely give you some of my experiences, both with large and smaller organizations and getting solutions out into the market, and how I went about it. And today, running a team that sells a Sales Navigator, which is a LinkedIn solution for sales and people and organizations. So kind of full circle in my career in that regard. But I would say our biggest change since COVID and the pandemic started is we all used to travel quite a bit. We sell to enterprise clients, and so we very much believe in meeting with them, or did believe in meeting with them face-to-face in person when we were in our sales cycles or moving forward, to a contract. We also did a lot of events, in-person conferences, et cetera. So primarily all of those activities now are all digital. So they're all in meetings like this. And actually, what I would say for myself personally is I have more time because I'm not running in and out of airports, and same with my team. So we're actually probably more productive and are able to have more meetings. So I'm actually quite positive about this change. And I think even when we exit the pandemic, I think we're going to see some differences in how we meet and go to market with our clients.
That's great, Joan. Thank you so much. Alan, what about you? A little bit about your background, and then tell us what you did.
Yeah, so I manage strategic sourcing, which is also known as procurement in some functions. So we are the purchasing arm of the bank and help drive all those individual decisions. My background, I've been in banking really my whole career, really starting on the product side of banking, and been with Bank of the West for about 12 years now. And made my way into this role just as a result of having to secure some good purchase decisions in the first place. I think on the pandemic side, lots of things have changed. Obviously, what we needed to buy during the pandemic changed a little bit for us, but I think more relevant to this, to Joan's point around the travel, not seeing our suppliers and vendors face to face, and those who were trying to sell to us. I think it's been a different challenge to be able to ensure that they are getting to, ultimately at the end of the day, the facts of what they're providing. So to a degree, from a buy side standpoint, we are very much focused as much as possible to take down the sales pitch and get to what's the facts, what are the facts and figures, what are the costs, what are your product, what does it actually do? And so to a degree, I think we found it to be refreshing because you don't have to navigate through that sales pitch. You ultimately can force the conversation very much into the dollars and cents and the facts that get presented by the various salespeople. So that said, I think I certainly can reflect as a salesperson how much more challenging that is to really make sure you can articulate what you would say in words onto a piece of paper or into an email or into a presentation that maybe wasn't as much of a burden in the past.
Alan, you already gave us some great tips on sort of some questions that we need to be ready to aim at when we get into these Zoom meetings to maximize efficiency and connect with our buyers. So those were great words of advice. Thank you. Whitney, would love to invite you now to share a little bit about your background and sort of what your experience has been in the change of COVID.
Yeah, so my background, I am a general partner at Acceleprise Ventures. We are a B2B SaaS accelerator and seed fund. I was the second partner to join Acceleprise at the time. I used to run our San Francisco headquarter location accelerator. And now I've taken a step back and I'm actually just working as an investor in the seed fund and then also advisory services around a methodology I developed called the sales method. I'm a 3-time VP of sales for startups. I've launched over 6 products and I've invested in over 100 startups at this point and worked with more than that from an advising go-to-market perspective. So early stage go-to-market's really my wheelhouse. And then specifically around advice I give around go-to-market, I actually published an article on this not too long ago. The thing that I've seen the biggest change in is just buyer behavior. So one, the email marketing is up about 50%. So how startups actually sell is changing quite a bit. How you get in touch with your market, demand generation seems to be a bigger challenge than it used to be. Using a lot of LinkedIn. So thank you, Joan. And then the other thing I would say specifically around the sales process itself is we're seeing a lot more product-led growth. So as corporations have shifted, one, they're shifting the price point in which they'll buy totally online up, which is great for startups. I think it was, in the tens of thousands prior, and now it's in the 50s plus. Some organizations are fully online, digital, including digital meetings, but it used to be that, $500,000 purchases were always made in person. That's not the case because you can't do it anymore. So that has shifted, which is great. And so this product-led growth piece that a lot of people are talking about is becoming more important in the standpoint of what Alan was actually talking about and getting past the sale portion and really understanding the nuts and bolts of the product and what it's going to do for your business. And so I've seen a lot of startups start to shift their strategy around how they're acquiring customers and getting their customers in the product sooner. So those are the 2 major changes I would say that have been that I've seen that are pretty prominent.
Those are certainly prominent ones. Now, Winnie, I want to stay with you just for a moment because, for our founders that are in the B2B space, there is a lot riding, or at least mythology perpetuates. There's a lot riding on closing that first deal. And yet it can sometimes be the most intimidating deal to even contemplate. How do you encourage founders to really think about where they go to get that first deal? And then how do they take those steps to initiate that conversation?
Yeah, so around the first deal, and Lenny wrote, I'm going to completely butcher his last name, so I'm not going to mention it, but Lenny, who's a big writer in Substack, actually wrote a great article on this on the first B2B SaaS sales. So I highly recommend people actually dive into that piece of content, go and look it up. It's one of his more popular posts. But if you just look up Lenny and product management, actually, he was what he wrote it. He did a bunch of interviews with founders. And when you look at where founders are getting their first sale, it's typically from their immediate network. So it's one of the things as well as investors we look pretty closely at is what does a founder's network look like? Because that's where those early deals are going to come from, are going to be either your initial network or your secondary network around introductions, either through your investors or people you've worked with in the past, because your brand really doesn't have a lot of credibility when you're starting out. And so you really need to lend that credibility from another place. And then when you think about the actual sales process. I know, this talk is specifically around how to catch a big fish. Usually your first customers are not going to be a big fish unless it was an enterprise organization you worked with in the past and you're building out the product for that enterprise org or in conjunction with that enterprise org. So what I typically recommend companies do is really map the initial segment of the market that they're looking to go after, utilizing some of the ideal customer profile and buyer persona worksheets, really understand what that looks like through their customer discovery process, and map out a subset of buyers looking, and I'm specifically focusing on mid-market to enterprise SaaS versus an SMB, but if really map out what the segment's going to look like that you really want to go after today. And then map out who those influencers are in that market. And I don't mean necessarily the speaker influencers. I specifically mean the market influencers, so the people who are driving the market's behavior. And look for those kind of mid-market up and comers where the bigger organizations are afraid of and the smaller organizations want to be like, because those are going to be your highest leverage points in a sale and really in your go-to-market. And so those are deals that are worth winning below cost because they will leverage a lot of demand, both up above market and below market as you want to move. So when you're looking to go after your big fish, you really want to look at who are the slightly smaller fish, because one, they're going to have a faster sales cycle. Two, they're more comfortable adopting technology to expand their go-to-market. Three, the sales cycle, the company is not going to be as bureaucratic, so there's less levels to get through. And four, they usually have bigger budgets per department, so they're spending more money because they're in a growth phase. So those are kind of the things I would look at as I'm mapping that go-to-market for those initial customers and those larger customers.
That was a fantastic advice, Whitney. Okay, so we've all got our first equation of the day. Name of customer divided by worth winning below cost on the denominator. If that works, then go ahead and go forward and put them on a target list. That's fantastic. Thank you. Now, speaking of things that can go on a target list, obviously email outreach is often something we spend a lot of time experimenting with. Ellen, you were already so gracious as to say it's a tough nut to crack. What have been some of the examples that you might point to when emails sort of go nowhere quickly in your mind of outreach at that buy level? Can you give a couple of indications of what you're really looking for in an email that grabs you when it's somebody new or someone coming in cold to try and connect with you?
Yeah, and I know, and interesting, I'll get Joan and others and Whitney to develop them. I would say the proliferation or the temptation on stock and share and form letters and again, I think there's been a lot of development to make things not look that way. I would say between both how it gets sent to us and getting caught in some of our filters and just ultimately the content of it, you can tell when it's just been genericized and fill in the blank for Bank of the West and fill in my name for Alan. And, even sometimes the really good ones, I might see it and I'll wait a little bit and then I'll see 3 other people in my org got the exact same email, but just, with the name changed. Honestly, while I get, and I don't want to be, cynical on the buy side, if you are really doing the targeting, if you are sincerely interested in casting and focusing on, in our case, Bank of the West or whoever you're going after, it is still worth the time and effort to really craft a specific item and a specific note that you just put your laptop up and wrote the 2 or 3 paragraphs I've been getting, because I'd say from that standpoint, if you can keep it personalized, it would really be terrific, especially if you're focusing on a big fish. It's going to be tough to get attention in the first place. So the form stuff, certainly try to get it. The one example, and I chuckled when I thought about the example, I've had people actually just send me it as a calendar invite. And if I want to tell you the absolute guaranteed way to not get my attention would be to write a whole bunch and stick a calendar invite. And it just, there's just no way. And again, I don't mean to sound so negative. It's just such a presumption that you're going to get, time on my calendar to go talk to me, as opposed to sort of putting in the work to bring the attention, to get the attention of my team, which ultimately we can maybe talk about later. But for a firm like the bank and with the bureaucracy that we do have, Whitney, unfortunately, that it does take a couple layers to get it up there, and ultimately, we think we're worth it. But we can talk about that stuff later. But never send a calendar invite. That would be my my strongest advice for the day.
Okay, no cold calendar invites. Everybody here has to
There
take
you
a
go.
pledge, no promises forward. But what Alan is obviously spending a lot of time thoughtfully articulating is taking the time to get to know the individual that you're really trying to outreach. And Joan, obviously LinkedIn has spent a great deal of time trying to make part of that process more intuitive, more intelligent, more thoughtful. Help us sort of gain some of your perspectives, recommendations, insights, if you will, on really how do we find maybe the right person within an organization to try to connect with, just like Alan's talking about. We may not necessarily be going in to Alan to start with. So how do we find the right person that we should be connecting with within the enterprise?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is understanding, what you're bringing to the table for that prospective client, right? What value are you going to bring, and to whom would it be most important, or what group of people? Because rarely these days is just one person in an organization going to make a decision. It's usually a very large group of people, including procurement. And actually, no offense to Ellen, but I would never probably start with procurement in the sense that you want to really establish some sort of relationship, et cetera, with the prospective client, with the actual business owner of the solution you're selling. And then hopefully as it progresses at some point, and not all the way at the end, start having discussions with procurement along the way. So, just on Alan's point of never send a calendar invite, I mean, I've never accepted a meeting that way too. I mean, even though I'm in sales, a lot of people try to sell to me and to our organization as well. And I think about it, I'm like, I would not want to have any of my team send anything to a prospective client that we wouldn't want to receive ourselves. So if I get a form letter that calls me John and asks me about hiring IT professionals and I'm in sales, I mean, it just has nothing to do with me, right? So personalization is key. Doing research on the person and the organization that you're going to reach out to. So that's obviously where you can do a lot of that on LinkedIn. You can do a lot of that, just on the internet in general, right? So a buyer first perspective is really the way we look at it, is like, what are you going to help them with? What business problem or what challenge that they might be looking to solve could you bring value to? And approach it that way, not about your product, but more, what's it about them that you can get their attention? So, we don't want to go in and start telling them, oh, I sell this and you could look at this. And that's also just not going to get anybody's attention. And then finally, I would say the best way, if you have the opportunity to use your network, and not just your personal network, but your work network. So through LinkedIn, through your company, if you can get a warm introduction, if you can find someone and surface who can introduce you to someone key in an organization, that's probably the best way in, as was mentioned before, because we actually have some data on that people are much more willing to take a meeting, like 5 times more willing to take a meeting via a warm introduction than a somewhat cold outreach, if you will. And obviously there's not always going to be a warm introduction path, but start there and then work back to, okay, I'm going to have to go at this organization directly, then how can I do it in a way that's going to be, they're going to be receptive to, and put yourself in their shoes. That's what I always tell my team. Like, would you want to respond to something like this? Would you want to engage with an organization that, treats you like this, that puts this kind of image forth? Probably not, if it's not a good message, right?
I love that, John. And I think, honestly, for a lot of our early stage founders, and having been there a little bit before, I can certainly be in the shoes. There's a worry of like, I'm not a salesperson. Like, I don't know how to sell. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I think what you're articulating is putting yourself in their shoes. You're built a product for a customer in mind. Hopefully, I'm sure 100% of our people on this call did that with that perspective. So it's not about selling. It's really about connecting with that buyer because of the thoughtfulness and wanting to get that feedback. So fantastic advice. Thank you so much. Now, Alan, back to you just for a minute. Obviously, a lot of our startups are struggling with lack of reputation, right? They're trying to catch this big fish because they don't necessarily have the large number of deals that they can point to that says, "Come on, Bank of the West. See, I've got all these other amazing companies
Yeah.
you want to join in this review too." How do you help nurture or encourage those earlier entrepreneurs through a process where this is a really big deal and they don't have that reputational know-how behind them that can gain that confidence from people like you?
Yeah, and I'm going to build on 2 points that were one heard earlier from Whitney and one heard earlier from Joan, which would be one, certainly if you are, this is your, and you've done your analysis and you want to do something with a bank or with a specific firm and that's large and you either you don't have the sale, you don't have much in the way of awareness. I think the idea that you're looking to collaborate and you're coming in the door with the expectation that you're going to need to collaborate, partner in some sort of pilot or some sort of model where you're putting something at stake, but you've determined that it's, you're in the banking sector, you'd really value to work with the bank. I think whether that's any other large firm, candidly, most large firms aren't going to just randomly buy your product without something at stake, unless you've got, again, some incredibly strong value proposition that we feel we have to beat the market to. But along the lines where Whitney would go, and while we're certainly a big organization as a bank, there's lots of banks that are much, much bigger than us. And so the sweet spot around thinking about, have you thought about the fact that this is, something in the financial sector, and that, eventually the really, really big banks might want to dominate this. It's an opportunity for Bank of the West as much as anyone else to be able to move quickly and collaborate with a fintech or a partner that's going to do something unique and interesting. And so those things certainly get our attention. I think the other point that Joan made, and I'll just kind of cover it to make sure that folks think about it, between procurement or sourcing, our large firms sort of put a lot of effort into creating the two layers between our product owners and those ultimate product organizations where you really do start and create the attention, and then our team's role and ultimately driving to the decision where we'll start to get down to the brass tacks of facts, et cetera. So without question, if you've either at least identified what and who you're selling into, what organization, and ideally you've actually started to foster the conversations with the right product people, or if they're reaching out to me, you're asking not to sell to Alan directly, but you're ultimately asking to say, who can I speak to in your organization that's responsible for X and Y? That shows me that, again, you've given some thought back to kind of my personalization point about, I'm selling into Bank of the West. I may not know where to talk to, but I've thought about the fact that Bank of the West is who I want to sell to, and B, I know conceptually I need to speak to this group of people. That the realities of it's certainly important that our product people have been engaged in the idea of what you're selling in the first place, and then ultimately when it comes across to us, while that is an important critical step in the ultimate purchase level, skipping past the product people and thinking I'm going to make a product decision is a mistake, and it's definitely something you'd want to avoid.
Product ownership is definitely a serious topic that a lot of our entrepreneurs ask a ton of questions about. Whitney, I want to come back to sort of that point that Alan just shared, but also ask you maybe to go a little bit deeper. Within a product unit, there are many different people that you could target, right? You could go in and say, I'm going to go talk to the top of that chain, or I'm going to go talk to the end user. Do you have any just general guidance and advice for, like, if you're selling within B2B, who is the right kind of target ownership layer within a business unit? Like, do you go mid-management? Do you go top senior vice president kind of layer? Do you go end user? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so who you go into really is dependent on what your product offering is. So if you're more of a strategic tool, the value proposition of your product is going to appeal to a more senior level. If you're, an end user type tool, a knowledge worker type tool, you're going to want to appeal to the bottom level. If you are a tool that is for the knowledge worker, and it's not a bottoms up type of sell, or what you're going to want to do is actually talk to someone more mid-level who understands the problems of someone who's more junior within the organization, because they're close enough to the problem from a management perspective, but senior enough that they have the ear of the senior manager. The other thing I would add to that is I like to look for people within a department that have been with the organization for over 18 months and less and been in their role for less than 6 years. The reason being, when you've been in the organization for 18 months, you usually have enough social power and enough understanding within the organization to be able to navigate a buying process. Under 6 years, basically over 6 years is kind of seen as an area around complacence, and in their role for 6 years specifically. So if they've switched around roles, they have kind of a fresh set of eyes and are trying to shake things up. But if they've been in the role for a long time, they are less likely to kind of have that perspective. So I like the 18 months to 6 year mark because it's a really good marker. So I'll look for people who kind of fit that profile. And then the other thing I like to look at is people who are active on Twitter. The reason being, usually people who are out in their social networks and posting on a regular basis, one, it's going to be easier to personalize a note to them because you know what they're talking about. And then two, they're more likely to be an early adopter, though Twitter's become a bit more mainstream these days because of the last the last presidency. But it has actually driven quite a bit, or excuse me, it does actually tell us quite a bit about a user's adoption profile if you look at kind of the law of diffusion of innovation. So those are several things. And then there's title, but titles change so much these days and they don't necessarily mean the same thing with an organization. So if you're trying to dig in, especially enterprise orgs, because that's kind of what we're looking at right now, where there's lots of people within an organization, I would look at the background of the person. So if you're a more technical product, you might want someone who has a technical education. If you're more of a sales or marketing product, you might want to look for someone with that type of background, finance, et cetera, even if they're not in that particular role. So say, for example, revenue operations, which is a new role within a lot of organizations I'm seeing in B2B. Actually, that role itself indicates that that company is more likely to be an innovator or early adopter, depending on how long that role's existed. Another thing, when you're talking to a person is, what was the last tool you purchased and what was that process like? If someone can walk you through that process, that usually is a good indicator of purchasing power and tells you you're in with the right person. If they can't, you probably don't have someone with enough decision-making power who knows how to navigate it. So those are some kind of gut checks I like to look at. There's the external and then there's the internal, but those are kind of the two once I've gotten someone on the phone, as well as prior.
Amazing insights. And that bridge that you just drew on qualification is where I want to kind of take our conversation next, because when we think about things that keep our entrepreneurs up at night, usually it's around, is this even a warm lead anymore? I don't know. They haven't told me no. They haven't told me yes. I'm sort of in this neverland place. So Joan, I'm going to come to you really quickly and ask you, if you will, how do we qualify a lead? Like, what's your advice? When you're working with your team or with other external advice out there, how do you really help people think through the qualification process and really trying to make it as efficient as it possibly can be?
Yeah, it's a great question because I haven't heard a no. You actually want to get to a no, so that you can really prioritize your time. And I think the best way, or maybe an efficient way of doing that, is really being very, very clear, if you can be, at the stage your solution is at, in terms of where the best fit for your solution is, in like size of company, type of organization, vertical market. If you have a good hypothesis around that, and then you utilize that as you actually are going, focusing on who you're targeting, and then as you do your discovery, you're constantly qualifying, yourself and them, right? So do I have a solution that meets their needs? Do they have the ability to buy something? Is this a priority? You're constantly kind of calibrating with the customer or prospective customer, as well as, you may say, they do have a need, they have budget, they really want to do something, but guess what? I can't my solution really can't meet that need and I'm not in a position to modify it. So you may actually qualify a lead out before they qualify you out, if that makes sense. And I think it's a super challenging area for, I think, especially founders who are thinking, oh, I can just change the product, to meet the needs. And sometimes you can, but I think it's also a slippery slope if you're trying to come up with a solution that you can sell, broadly in a repeatable way to not too quickly start changing it to meet one specific customer's needs. So it's a balance, right? Because you want to get your first sale or your first sales in a fairly decent named organization, but you also want to make sure that you haven't completely thrown out your roadmap if it's applicable still, right? So I think you're continuously in every meeting you have. I always, and whether you're selling from like an organization like LinkedIn or an early stage company, a lot of people will take meetings with you. And I always tell my team, people will take meetings with us, but not everybody's going to buy from you, this year. So it's up to us to figure that out with them. Is this the right time? Do we have something that really meets your needs and that you're looking to do something, or can I get this higher on your list because I've really explored your business and I've presented my solution in such a way that you can't not go forward because it really solves something that's a priority for you. So I think just continuously asking along the way and having those conversations, like, is this something that you think you'd want to do, in the next 3 months, 6 months, based on what we've talked about? Does this make sense for your organization? If so, kind of like what Whitney said, how would, have you bought something like this before? If not, who do we need, else do we need to get involved? And oh, by the way, I thought maybe this person or that person. Have an informed opinion. Do your research when you come to the meetings. Have a hypothesis even about how you want them to buy. So like Alan mentioned, if you're expecting that they're going to want to do some type of pilot, don't necessarily wait and let them set the terms for that. You kind of proactively say, well, this is how we would look at helping you make an informed decision about our solution, and lay out for them how you might propose to do a pilot. And then you can also, through that process, continue to qualify. This is what we would need you to do if we're going to pilot with you. We would need to meet with so-and-so. We would need with the budget holder prior to the pilot to make sure at the end of the pilot, they're prepared to go forward if it's successful. All those types of things, I think you can, without being arrogant, you can help set the stage for yourself and qualify along the way.
Oh, I love that. And I really especially appreciate the advice of, don't being afraid to ask those questions. At the end of the day, there are only so many meetings that we can take, no matter, even with Zoom, there's 24 hours in a day. We're not changing that anytime soon. So how do we really make the best use of the meetings, of the hours, of the people that we're engaging with? And no be no forever. It may just be not right now. So really appreciate that advice, Joan, very much so. Alan, one of the things that we often share with our founders is the importance of having a few great enterprise outcomes so that they build up their own live case studies that they can show and pull forward for other enterprise environments that may want to purchase from them. Equally, I think our entrepreneurs joining us today would love to hear from your perspective, assuming they've done everything right and take this advice, go forward, qualify, do the investigation, make sure it's personalized, you take a meeting, it goes forward. Can you point to one or two recent examples, or maybe even past examples of where it's gone well and what that looked like, what that journey looked like from your perspective, and maybe, if you can, why it went well? Like, in your mind, what was it about those pitches or about those meetings or about that specific example that really stood out as a shining one from your mind?
There are certainly several fintechs that we've focused on at the bank, and that have gone reasonably well, and some of them have gone on the light side. I mean, I think that back to the point, really, again, so spot on for both Joan and Whitney in terms of profiling and understanding. There are lots of people who work for the bank. I think having that base conversation around, tell me about the purchasing process, tell me what to expect, and certainly if you didn't know otherwise, to know that there's the layer of the executive decision maker, and then there's the layer of sourcing and procurement, and that most organizations, those are important things to get through. I think that almost all of the scenarios when we've done fintech work, that they've been well educated, and that typically those have come from our technology or our business product folks, where they've got someone sort of fundamentally excited about the idea, but they've been clear on they're selling a bank product. They understand that they're about to try to do work with the bank, and that they'd be prepared, not just on the sales pitch and the pilot side, but also just fundamentally prepared. And I recognize this is tough for entrepreneurs and founders, but there are going to be contracts. There's going to be some detail, and certainly it's not the intent on the contract side for the bank or whoever you're working with to want to use that to do anything untoward, but ultimately everyone needs to be protected from a contractual standpoint. So those startups have almost always come with strong legal support, not to argue about it, but ultimately that they're prepared, they understand what they're looking at, they understand that banks are regulated, and therefore there are some conditions that we have to support to be in business as a bank. If I distill this all the way back to it, that when things have fallen flat on their face, it's when they've sold on the idea and something buzzing, exciting, and perhaps we've got a junior resource on the team that's excited about the idea. But when it comes down to just fundamentally the details of having to work with a bank or again any other large institution, recognizing that it's not, you got to get past the salesperson, sort of take your sales hat off and turn into your operational business person and start to work through the contractual pieces, the due diligence pieces, and be prepared to be able to respond to those things in good order. I'd say it's relatively a high hurdle to get to a point where we're really considering a startup, but ultimately, if you can get past and the fact that you've shown that you've really thought about, again, back to my personalization point, you've thought about the organization, you've thought about that you're going to be doing this work for a bank, and that whether you're doing it on pilot or not, you're ultimately going to need to have some operational details in place. And again, those examples, I think have turned into, for us, turned into some fruitful outcomes. I guess I'll come back to say they've almost always been pilot, to be candid. It's while it's certainly an opportunity to define what your pilot terms would be, I definitely think if you're thinking large organizations, at least on the financial side, we will be naturally risk averse, and therefore, piloting in that scope and making sure that you can still make some reasonable revenue in that opportunity, yet at the same time be willing to take on what a pilot might look like.
Awesome. Just great insights, and surrounding ourselves with a support system, realizing that the deal isn't done by the time that somebody says yes, right? It's just a start in many ways of managing through the relationship and the next chapter that's really unfolding. Fantastic. Speaking of chapters unfolding, Whitney, you have this great perspective because you wear both the viewpoint of investor and at the same time viewpoint of knowing what it takes to really close the deal. So I'm going to ask you a hard question, wearing both those perspectives in mind if you can. Obviously, entrepreneurs have to move quickly. That is one of the most important things that they have going with them each and every day. So is it most important in your mind from either of those dynamics to be looking at just getting the deal done as a free deal versus a paid deal? And then also at the same time worrying about, have I got enough of a feature set done that I can sell the comprehensive vision of my product versus sort of having this inertia of perfection that's, ultimately ends up tripping us up from getting a product out to market. What's your advice on both sides of those things when it comes to the landscape of what matters at the capital allocator layer and also what matters at the end of the day for our entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So the way I look at the sale itself, so on a startup side, really what you're trying to do is prove value for your product. And so coming back to Alan's point that he was describing, and I'm just going to break it down into two things, is sales is two things. It's problem solving and project management. The problem solving piece is, can you actually solve the problem that the company is truly trying to solve? And there's a level of credibility, of value that you can build. Even in the initial sales process around educating the customer on the cost of the problem within the organization by asking the right questions, kind of the walk me through, talk me through, help me understand type questions. and framing that problem for them through education and your knowledge of the industry. The other piece is that operational kind of the operational piece that Alan brought up, in understanding what the sales process looks like and helping them navigate the internal workings of their own organization and what resources they need to bring to the table and what the process is going to look like to work together, and really being educated around that. And if you're going into an industry, you should have friends in that industry that can help you walk you through that. So that's kind of the value piece. When you're looking at the proof of concept, which most companies, if you're selling into an enterprise organization, will need to do in the early days. Not necessarily always the case, because if you do come from that organization or have strong relationships within that organization, they may be willing to do some type of contract with you, even a 12-month pilot, you know? So when you're looking at that sales process or proof of concept within that org, the big thing when you're mapping that out is one, you have to look at where the problem sits within the organization, because that's going to tell you whether you're actually going to be able to charge for it, kind of what the ROI is looking like. Is it a direct ROI for that person that's buying the product and it's high level, or is it really easy to measure that ROI? Or is it a secondary or tertiary ROI, meaning the value kind of comes after they've been using the product for a little while and you see it. So it's where that aha moment really sits in the product usage, and that's going to tell you what that pilot process is going to look like and whether you're going to be able to charge for it, or it's going to be easier to charge for it. If it's a complex product, sometimes you can charge for it, but it is a little bit harder. And so I do expect most companies to have a pilot. When you're looking to fundraise, you should have some pilots that have converted, so that there's a strong product market, there's indications of a strong product market fit, and that you do know how to run a pilot. That's going to be a really good indicator that you have something there and have been able to prove it out. 2 or 3 is really a good indicator if you have that. If you can, ideally, you know, and whether they're paid or not, really, it's valuable because it shows that you're able to sell in value before that pilot converts to a paid contract. But if you are raising around the conversion period, there's going to be enough indicators there whether it was paid or not. So you can get past that by having the pilot convert. But again, coming back to the value piece, it really has to do with where the aha moment sits for the customer, meaning where they start to see the value of the product and how you should design the proof of concept or the usage or getting the customer through. And so you really need to deeply understand that either within your beta customers or in your customer discovery, so that you can map out whether you're going to need a pilot, and if not, move that aha moment as early in the sales process as humanly possible, because that's going to determine that piece and whether you can sell it in without a pilot or not, and whether you can sell it in paid or not.
Fantastic. Now, aha moments, to use that fantastic phrase, a lot of our entrepreneurs, Joan, love and believe 1,000 times over that the product speaks for itself. And so their aha moment is wanting to jump head in and give you that ability to see a demo right up front really quickly, really early. I'm going to ask you a super practical and somewhat explicit question here, but like, do you advise for that or against that? Like, how do you think about where and when a demo is the right point to start, or do you kind of hold that back for a little bit with your environments and your suggestions of impact for the customer's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would say generally hold that back. And I mean, it's not 100%, but it would have to be an outlier situation to start with a demo. Because again, you want to start your discussions about the customer, not about your solution. And really understanding what they're trying to solve, what the impact is, like, you know, what Whitney said, if I don't understand the impact of having a solution for it and what the impact is of not having a solution, it's harder for me, you know, or anyone to, I think, to actually show them a solution that's tied to their needs, right? Or tied to their business challenge. And so you really have to learn that up front. Now, clearly, there's a little bit of an art to that, and a science to that. You can't just go in, get a meeting and have, okay, I have 50 questions, let me rattle them off, because nobody wants to, participate in that. So I think you have to be savvy enough to do your discovery in a conversational way. And you're not going to be just asking, you're going to be providing along the way, maybe some educating, some industry knowledge, some observations you've had and talking to others in their vertical or in their space. And so it's an exchange of information, but through that exchange of information, you're really pulling out of them what they care about, what's important to their business, what their business goals are, right now, 6 months from now down the road. And then when you do, and then you maybe at the end are talking about, well, based on what I heard you say, I believe that I could show you, our solution that would do this and tie to this challenge and do this and tie to that challenge. Would that be something you'd like to learn more about and have me, show you how it might do that? So you're bringing them along with you and getting them to really articulate. And then in probably the next meeting, you're going to prepare a very tailored demonstration if you can, or discussion if you can't have a full demo, depending on the state of your solution at that point in time, right? To go through and really tie it back to that conversation. And you're going to continue reiterating and learning along the way, because each time you might do it with different people, you're going to learn more about that organization, and they're going to learn more about your solution and the potential match. And I think as you're having those conversations and you're always thinking, okay, is this a good enough match that we would be successful if we piloted with this client or this prospect? And you're already going to start thinking about how do we move this forward if we do need to do a proof of concept or a pilot, because there's that step in every sales cycle. You really can't skip it. Now, if you're a larger company with a lot of clients, you can do a reference, but if you're early stage, you're going to have to get them comfortable that you actually can help them. And so if you can't do a pilot for some reason because your product is too complex or whatever to do a shorter pilot, maybe it's in-depth demonstrations and sandbox. There's all different ways to get them through that proof of concept stage, but it starts with doing super good discovery up front, and probably with multiple people, and then moving into the let me show you how my solution can help you stage.
I love that. That's such great advice. And even the tailoring of the experience as you get more information and more perspective is going to have them leaning in rather than just sort of going, oh, this is just a canned demo that I'm watching and I could have watched this on Vimeo or anything else. So much appreciated there. Yeah, I want to spend a couple of minutes really, really quickly on sort of the etiquette around pricing models, which is another thing that keeps our entrepreneurs up time and time again. And then we're going to open up for the last 5 minutes of rapid fire Q&A. I promise. Thanks for all of the entrepreneurs popping in those questions. Much appreciated. But let's talk about the etiquette behind pricing models, discounts, how often to sort of offer them up, when to offer them up, when you send over the proposal. I kind of want to do a bit of a free form here, rather than necessarily explicitly call on Alan, Whitney, and Joe to sort of answer it in that order. You've all gotten a ton of proposals. You've all had to deal through, like, how much do I discount? When do I discount? When do I offer a discount? What is your general rules of advice when it comes to thinking through that really difficult strategy that an entrepreneur faces? Whoever wants to answer, feel free to jump in to start.
I'll go first. Oh, go ahead, Whitney, please.
Oh, no,
I
actually want to get Alan's, I was going to say, I kind of want Alan's feedback first, because he's on the other side of the table most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many variables that come into play. I would say probably the first sort of lesson I would say is that free is certainly not free always to us, and kind of the project size is always an internal cost. And so the idea of it's free is going to suddenly make it better than it being $10,000 or whatever the price point would be. So while certainly we'll take free, and free might be what we require given the internal investments there, it's not as attractive sounding as you might otherwise think. I would say that the biggest advice I would have is actually shifting and talking in terms of what your actual costs are, to a degree, to the level of transparency that you can provide. Again, certainly as a startup, I think the biggest respect that we end up having is folks to say, look, we're not incented to have any company, whether it's startup or not, lose money to work with us. It's not a sustainable model. And so typically when we think about piloting, we think about startup pieces, we look about what can we do from a reasonable cost recovery to ensure that we're getting discounts now, maybe future discounts if this takes off, those kinds of considerations. So if I'm thinking about discounting along the way, I'm thinking absolutely around what do I need to just sort of cover my costs here of whatever pilot length we're talking about. And that's sort of where I would aim as a sweet spot. Certainly orgs might still push you to free and you not need to be able to go there. But if you've given some thought to, it's not what you've priced up from a market standpoint, but ultimately looking at a cost recovery logic, I think that'll get you a lot of opportunity, certainly more interesting than just everyone else saying it's free.
I can jump in after that. So the way I think about discounting is what's the actual value of that customer. So there's the element of, I was talking about kind of those mid-market up and comers who are leverage in a market. You're probably going to be more inclined to discount for those customers than, than other customers. So that's one, is whether you do it or not. Two, the other thing I would look at is what's actually on the table to discount. So money is just like one of the top three things that companies really care about. Especially if you're dealing with an enterprise organization where you're going to have a lot of end users using a product, support may be more important, which is actually a reasonably low cost within organizations. It might be that they're looking at the procurement team, like Alan, for example, needs a specific discount. Maybe it's adding time to the contract itself, like adding a 3-month period on there. There's also the element, if you're selling to an enterprise organization, around privacy, security, and insurance that are requirements. And those are things on when the start date of those comes into play. They're costs for you as an organization, where if you can push those back to a 3-month period, or maybe even post-pilot, if you're not dealing with any internal data during the pilot period, they're actually pretty big cost savings for you. So there's lots of things you can actually play around with within the contract that aren't necessarily a discount on the amount of money. There could be seats that you could add. I know I have a client, for example, that sold to a conglomerate that had a lot of different people with a lot of different organizations. They were selling to the larger org, and they wanted to get into the additional organization. So they sold a bulk of like 100 seats for with a few on each separate department, where it was a huge value for them because they got a couple seats in. But in really in order to gain the value of the product, you really needed a large number of seats. So it got them to actually build in expansion opportunities within the initial larger contract and a discount that was actually of value to them. So there's lots of things you can actually play around with when you're looking at discounting that aren't necessarily the net dollar amount.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Joan, anything you'd add?
No, I agree with both everybody's input. The other thing I would add is, like when you're to the point where you're discussing, discounts, et cetera, with procurement, hopefully you've gotten to the point with what the relationships you build with this organization, including procurement, that it's not just an adversarial conversation. And I think especially for an early stage company, you need partners, right? So you might have to give to get, and they need to give to get. So you have to figure out what's important. So like Whitney said, Alan might want to just make sure the company is protected. So he may be looking more about, let's cover our costs and let's make sure there's no liability issues for us. So I think really understanding that, and then just having fairly honest conversations and say, listen, I need to, we want to work with your organization. It's a great investment for us. We think it's a great investment for you, but like, we need to cover our costs. And it would, we're not trying to make money on this pilot. We're just trying to keep ourselves solvent here, or maybe solvent's not the right word, but we want to have a long-term opportunity with your organization. So we want to make sure that we can cover the cost of providing extraordinary support, extraordinary, response times, et cetera. So I think figuring out that equation and having, again, a thought about it before you go into those meetings, so that it doesn't, like Whitney said, just stay on the price point number. And honestly, the pilot piece is just, the small dollars. It's what's going to happen after the pilot. And, a savvy, and I'm sure Ellen will tell you this, is that, he's going to look at not just what you want to charge me for the pilot, but what's the longer term pricing, because that's really where the bigger negotiation starts or happens. But someone that does this a lot is going to start doing that with you early on before you even do the pilot potentially. So just having those thoughts in your mind about where the gives and the gets can be to make sure that you're kind of doing the right thing for your organization as well as for the client organization.
Oh, I love that. Such great advice. So there have been so many really good questions that got dropped in that unfortunately, we're just not going to have time to answer today. But I'm going to ask each of you this, and feel free to say, like, I'm going to punt and let you know, and then we'll put that in our feedback to all of our entrepreneurs today as well. What is a blog or what is a resource that has made a difference to you, one that you go to when evaluating or thinking about new sales tools, when evaluating or thinking about new sales strategies, or when evaluating and thinking about new processes and perspectives that can impact buyer outcomes? Is there anything that you're like, put this on your must read list or watch list or subscribe list that you would offer to our audience today?
I can start there. I have a ton. So Bargaining for Advantage is a fantastic book for learning how to negotiate. It actually takes a very technical view and academic view to negotiating. So it breaks it down into core components so you can figure out the right tool to utilize in a negotiation. Like Joan was just talking about a strategy called log rolling, which is one of my favorite for selling. So Bargaining for Advantage is one. Sales Acceleration Formulas by Mark Roberge is really great for sales management. There's Flip the Funnel, there's Spin Selling. There's a lot of things. And then I, as a startup newsletter that I follow, Tom Tongues is great, from Redpoint Ventures. I also mentioned Lenny, and again, I'm blanking on his last name, but it's a fantastic startup newsletter that looks at product-led growth, that kind of thing. And then OpenView, if you guys are a product-led growth company, OpenView's newsletter is really good. And then NFX is another one. Sorry, guys, if I took anyone's ideas, but NFX has really good content.
Those are all great. Trust us. People are jotting down notes as quickly, as rapidly as they can. Colin, thanks so much for putting all those links in the chat. That's amazing. Joan, Ellen, anything that you would jump in and add there, top of mind? Those were great resources.
Well, I think Whitney covered a lot of the startup, that type of world. So if you're looking just to gain maybe some knowledge or confidence around sales and you haven't done it, you're more on the founder side, even taking a step back and kind of getting familiar with value selling. There's a number of different books. There's different methodologies, like the Challenger methodology, which is more of a, what was CEB, now Gartner, but has a lot of articles around that. I think, and there's a lot of different books as well. And I don't have all the titles at the top of my head, but I think some of those just kind of that help you think about what's the appropriate style of your selling for the market you're in, et cetera. Because, if you're selling very transactional, that's completely different. But if you're selling in the enterprise, I think you do really want to think about, value selling, buyer first, all those kind of just basic selling motions. And so that's what I would recommend, like just reading some books, the Challenger sale, things like that to help you.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you. Ellen, anything to add or?
Yeah, I mean, I should be the last person to give you sales advice. I will share, if you're interested in tackling from the other side, probably the one sort of resource I go to is called SIG, SIG.org, which is a sourcing industry group. That's an organization for sourcing professionals, but it talks about topics and certainly is focused of sourcing and how we think. That's an interesting perspective if you have time to kind of try to get into our minds.
I love that. Well, Joan, Whitney, Ellen, thank you all so much. I learned tons. I know everyone here has been commenting and appreciating the thoughtful responses, the incredible tactical and practical advice that you all gave so graciously today. Thank you. It's been a ton of fun hosting this conversation. We will hopefully have a chance to bring the band back together again, maybe for another round at some stage in the future. And again, our absolute thanks and appreciation for taking the time and sharing this knowledge with our entrepreneurs trying to do great work by closing some great deals in their future. To all of our entrepreneurs joining today, thank you, thank you, thank you for your time. We know the only limitation of an entrepreneur is the time that they have, and so we appreciate you showing up for this content in order to inform. We have one ask back to you, of course. We can only produce great content if you tell us what's working and what's not. So if you'll do me a favor and take a moment to complete that survey that you saw dropped into the chat, we'll follow up, obviously, in our feedback with you today again as a helpful and a friendly prompt. But please do take us a moment. Let us know what worked, what you'd like to hear more of, and what you need next. Thank you for all that you're doing out there in the world. We're looking forward to hosting you again for another conversation here not too far in the future, and stay tuned for more programs coming out. Thanks to our sponsors, and thanks to all of you for the work that you do. Take care. Bye-bye.